hydrologic cycle is the single most important cycle on Earth. It not only shapes the geomorphology of the physical world, but also plays at least some role in determining species biodiversity and richness in virtually every ecosystem on Earth. Other important cycles are the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, which can vastly affect or even decimate aquatic ecosystems. Excessive nitrogen or phosphorus in an aquatic ecosystem can result in anoxic conditions that may collapse the entire food web of that ecosystem.
Hypoxia events and aquatic toxins are causing large-scale fish kills and vastly affecting the aquatic ecosystem as we enter the last epoch known as Anthropocene. The process known as eutrophication is causing large-scale phytoplankton bloom, commonly called as algal bloom, and when they perish, they are eaten by the microorganisms labeled as detrivores. The end result of eutrophication is poor water quality, low dissolved oxygen level, as well as high toxic levels in the aquatic waters.
There are two main categories of phytoplankton that contribute to eutrophication. On one end, you have eukaryotic green algae, which consist of diatoms, dinoflagellates, etc. And dinoflagellates are what cause a red tide, which lead to massive fish kills. On the other end, you have prokaryotic cyanobacteria, which are commonly called blue-green algae. These blue-green algae are called diazotrophs, meaning they can fix atmospheric nitrogen. Because of this, they need to live near the surface called the euphotic zone to be able to have access to this nitrogen. One of the biggest problems with cyanobacteria is with cyanotoxins. In freshwater ecosystems like this, Microcystis aeruginosa is one of the most common cyanobacteria species. This species emits a neurotoxin known as anatoxin A, which can be fatal in humans. While it doesn't really affect aquatic ecosystems, it can bioaccumulate in fish and be consumed by humans. It can also be consumed by drinking the water. And the EPA has very specific guidelines per state as to at what level they deem safe for recreational and drinking water uses. Behind me is Bon Butte Lake. This is an example of a mesotrophic to eutrophic water body. On one end you have a oligotrophic, which is a perfectly healthy oxygenated water body, and on the other end you have totally eutrophic systems that have regular periods of anoxia. And this is a prime example of a water body that is contaminated by farm runoff, which is likely high in nutrients. To my left is a farm, which they likely fertilize, and there are high amounts of runoff that happen into the water. And there are likely high amounts of nitrates in the water, which would favor the eukaryotic phytoplankton, so there are likely high amounts of dinoflagellates and diatoms in this.
Nutrients enter the aquatic ecosystem through air, surface water, or groundwater. So where do these nutrients come from? Basically, they can be divided broadly into three categories: urban sources, agricultural sources, and fossil fuel sources. Now, the main component of these sources are also nitrogen and phosphorus. And eutrophication nutrients also depends on the region of the world we are. So for example, in United States, the nutrients enter the water by the manure produced by agricultural processes and fertilizers that are used in agriculture. The basic source of nitrate is wastewater treatment.
The sources previously listed are examples of external nutrient loading, whereas there's another more complex source known as internal loading. With phosphorus, for example, hypoxic conditions change the oxidation reduction rates happening in the water. This essentially strips phosphorus that is normally bound to sediment and is made available to organisms in the water body. And this can actually be a runaway process because eutrophication lowers light availability for benthic organisms such as macrophytes, which are plants living on the bottom. This then decreases dissolved oxygen in the water, which then increases rates of internal phosphorus loading, which then increases eutrophication, and so on.
Eutrophication can be prevented in various ways. First of all, what we can do is plant vegetation along the river banks so that it absorbs the nutrients from the river. For example, we can plant alder tree along the banks. Second would be removal of dams so that we increase the river water discharge, and in this way we can increase the dissolved oxygen in the water. Thirdly being, we can improve the infrastructure of wastewater treatment plants in cities, and we can also prevent agricultural runoffs into water. Lastly, better treatment of stormwater in the cities can be done to prevent eutrophication.
An effective treatment of excess phosphorus in the water is with aluminum sulfate, or alum for short. The aluminum sulfate disassociates, and the aluminum binds to phosphate in the water. The aluminum phosphate and the leftover sulfate precipitate out of the water and into the sediment. This process mitigates cyanobacteria blooms but is expensive and relatively temporary. The cost of this, on average, is $450 an acre, and it only lasts 3 to 5 years.